Have you ever felt that even though you're in the same place, you simply no longer belong to that frequency? The room hasn't changed, the people haven't changed, but something in you has. While everyone else fights for scraps of attention and chaos, you've begun to disappear from their drama. You see it happening, but it doesn't pull you in the same way. This isn't indifference, and it's not isolation. But be careful, this disappearance is not an accident. It's the symptom of a real internal transition. Something in your nervous system, in your perception, is reorganizing. And if you don't understand what's happening, you might mislabel it as detachment, confusion, or even loss. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment. Where have you already stopped reacting the way you used to? That subtle shift may be the first sign that the old reality is losing its grip on you. There comes a moment when the things that once felt heavy start to feel strangely light. Not because they were solved, not because the world changed overnight, but because something in you stopped gripping them the same way. Think about a problem that used to consume you, a conflict, a fear about money, a need to be understood. When you revisit it now, it almost looks pixelated, like an old photo stretched too far on a modern screen. The outlines are still there, but the emotional density is gone. It doesn't press against your chest the way it used to. This is what it feels like when solid matter begins to dissolve, not physically, not magically, but perceptually. The walls of your old life were built from repeated attention. Every worry you replayed, every story you told about who hurt you, every assumption about how things always go. Attention is what hardened those experiences into something that felt concrete. When attention shifts, solidity weakens. You might notice it in subtle ways. A comment that would have triggered you now passes through like wind through a screen door. An old ambition that once defined your identity now feels like clothing that doesn't quite fit. You look around and realize you are standing in the same room, but the emotional architecture has changed. This can feel disorienting. The mind prefers stability, even if that stability is uncomfortable. When something solid begins to blur, part of you may wonder, am I losing my edge? Am I becoming passive? Have I stopped caring? But look closer. What is dissolving isn't your intelligence or your drive. It's the reflex to fuse yourself with every external event. You are starting to see problems as objects in front of you rather than extensions of your identity. That small shift changes everything. Imagine holding a stone in your hand for years. After a while, you forget it's there. Your muscles adapt around it. It feels like part of you. The moment you loosen your grip, the weight becomes obvious, and when you finally let it drop, your hand feels almost empty, maybe even numb. That numbness can be mistaken for loss. In reality, it's space, and space can feel unfamiliar. If your nervous system has been trained on constant tension, calm can register as strange. You may even feel tempted to recreate old conflicts just to feel solid again, to remind yourself who you are by reacting the way you always have. This is the quiet test hidden inside dissolution. When past problems appear transparent, there is a subtle urge to poke them, to check if they are still real, to revisit an old argument in your head, to scroll through something that used to trigger you, to call someone who pulls you back into a familiar dynamic. Why? Because solidity feels safer than uncertainty. But here's the truth. Not everything that feels solid is stable. Many of the structures you relied on were built from repeated emotional charge, not from clarity. They felt firm because you kept reinforcing them. Now, as your perception changes, those structures can't hold their previous shape. And instead of celebrating that, you might try to repair them. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Is there something in your life that is clearly losing energy, yet you keep trying to revive it? A conversation pattern, a role you play, a version of yourself that once brought validation. Watch how your body responds when you think about forcing it back. There's usually tightness, a subtle heat, a contraction in the chest or jaw. That contraction is information. It tells you that you are trying to solidify something that is already dissolving. When matter dissolves, it doesn't need help. It needs space. This doesn't mean you detach from responsibility. It means you stop injecting life into what has already completed its function. You begin to notice that some battles no longer require your participation. Some identities no longer require your defense. And as that awareness deepens, something interesting happens socially. The people who once reacted strongly to you may seem confused. The hooks that once caught you don't find the same grip. It's as if your outline in their field of perception has softened. Not because you disappeared, but because the frequency of reaction they were tuned to is no longer broadcasting from you. This is delicate, because when you realize something is collapsing, there can be a strong impulse to save it, to stabilize it, to hold it together out of habit or loyalty. That impulse feels urgent, almost physical, and this is where the next danger begins to surface, the instinct to grab the embers of a structure that is already burning out, hoping you can cool them with your bare hands. When something in your old life begins to collapse, the first instinct is almost always heat. You feel it rise in your body before you can name it, a tightening in the stomach, a flush in the face, a sudden need to act, to speak, to fix. It feels urgent, necessary, even noble. But urgency is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is simply thermal reaction. Imagine reaching into a fire to save a piece of wood that is already turning to ash. Your mind tells you, if I move fast enough, I can preserve this. Your body tells you something else, it burns. And still, part of you wants to prove that you can control the flame. This is the fatal error at this stage of your transition, trying to rescue what is naturally dissolving. When structures lose their solidity, they often don't go quietly. They flare, relationships become dramatic, work environments grow tense, old fears try one last time to demand attention. The heat increases, and because you have been conditioned to equate intensity with importance, you interpret that heat as a sign that you must intervene. Look carefully at your recent reactions. Has there been a moment when something triggered you more strongly than it should have? A conversation that escalated quickly? A sudden need to defend your position, to correct someone, to explain yourself again? That spike is not random. It is friction between who you are becoming and what is falling away. Thermal reaction is the reflex to respond to collapse with more energy. You argue louder, you try harder, you push your point further, you attempt to stabilize a system that is already breaking down. But fire feeds on oxygen. The more force you apply, the more visible and dense you become within that old dynamic. You may tell yourself you are standing up for truth. You may believe you are protecting what matters, and sometimes that is valid. But often, if you slow down enough to feel your body, you will notice something else. The reaction is fueled by fear of losing identity. If this role ends, who am I? If this person walks away, what does that say about me? If this system collapses, where do I stand? Those questions generate heat, and heat seeks release. There is a simple observation you can try right now. Think of a recent situation where you felt the need to respond immediately. Notice how your body remembers it. Does your jaw tighten? Does your breathing change? Does your chest contract slightly? Stay with that sensation for a few seconds without justifying it, without building the story around it. Just observe the temperature of your reaction. You will begin to see that heat is not always a call to action. Sometimes it is a sign that something inside you feels threatened by change, and when you act from that heat, you reattach yourself to the very structure that is trying to dissolve. The old reality recognizes reaction. It feeds on it. It knows how to pull you back in through irritation, outrage, or the need to be right. The moment you argue intensely with a collapsing system, you become visible to it again. You match its temperature. There is a different response available, and it feels almost unnatural at first. It is the choice not to grab the ember, to let it burn out without your interference, to feel the heat rise in your body and allow it to pass without translating it into words or actions. This is not suppression. Suppression pushes heat down and stores it. What we are talking about is witnessing the reaction without identifying with it. Letting the wave move through without building a narrative around it. You may fear that if you don't react, you are weak, that silence equals surrender. But sometimes silence is precision. It is the refusal to add energy to what is already consuming itself. As you practice this, something subtle begins to shift. Situations that once pulled you in with magnetic force start losing their grip. You notice that when you don't respond with heat, the dynamic changes. Some people lose interest in provoking you, some conflicts dissolve on their own. And this can feel strange, because part of your nervous system was calibrated to constant engagement. When the fire dies down, there is a moment of emptiness, a space where noise used to be. That space can feel like a void. Without the heat of reaction, without the familiar friction of conflict, you may sense a quiet gap opening inside you. It might register as loneliness or disorientation or even doubt. If I am not fighting this anymore, what fills the space? This is where many people misinterpret the transition. They mistake the cooling of old fires for loss of meaning. They rush to ignite something new, just to avoid feeling that empty interval. But that interval is not a mistake. It is a clearing. When the heat subsides and you stop feeding the flames, you begin to encounter a different kind of sensation, not intensity, not drama, but a subtle stillness. And within that stillness, there is an unfamiliar vacuum forming, one that does not threaten you, but invites you to see what remains when the noise fades. After the heat settles and you stop reacting on impulse, something subtle begins to change in the way people respond to you. It's not dramatic, no announcement is made, but interactions that once felt predictable start to shift in quiet, almost strange ways. Think about someone who used to trigger you consistently. Maybe they always found a way to criticize you, challenge you, or pull you into their emotional storms. It almost felt targeted, like they had a sensor tuned specifically to your weak points. And maybe they did. Human beings are constantly reading each other, not just through words, but through tone, posture, micro-expressions, timing. We scan for signals of agreement, resistance, insecurity, dominance. It's an invisible radar system, running beneath conscious awareness. Most of the time, we don't even realize we're broadcasting. When you carried unresolved heat inside you, when you reacted quickly or defended yourself intensely, you were transmitting a clear signal. You were easy to locate. Certain personalities could sense where to press. Certain dynamics knew exactly how to hook you. But as you stopped feeding old reactions, your signal changed. This is what people often call frequency, though it doesn't have to be mystical. It's the pattern of emotional responses you emit consistently. If someone expects irritation and you no longer provide it, their internal radar struggles to lock on. If someone is used to pulling validation from you and you stop offering it automatically, the dynamic becomes unstable. You might notice it in small moments. A person who once argued with you now seems uninterested. A toxic pattern that repeated for years suddenly feels flat. Someone who thrived on your engagement walks past you without the usual spark of friction. At first, this can feel confusing. You might even wonder if you did something wrong. Why are they distant? Why does this feel different? But look deeper. You didn't withdraw love. You didn't become cold. You simply stopped matching a certain emotional pattern. And when the pattern disappears, the radar loses its target. There's an important nuance here. Becoming invisible in this way isn't about avoidance or superiority. It's not about pretending you're above others. It's about coherence. When your internal state becomes more stable, less reactive and less dependent on external validation, your social field reorganizes around that stability. Not everyone can engage with that new signal. Some people will feel calmer around you without knowing why. Others will feel unsettled because they can no longer predict your responses. And a few may drift away entirely, not because of conflict, but because the old energetic exchange is no longer available. This is where self-honesty becomes crucial. There's a temptation to interpret this shift as spiritual advancement, to tell yourself, I've evolved beyond them. But that thought can be another hook, another subtle form of ego heat, trying to rebuild identity. Pause and examine your motivation. Are you truly more at peace, or are you quietly enjoying the idea of being untouchable? Are you withdrawing because you are centered, or because you are avoiding vulnerability? The difference matters. Real invisibility to unhealthy dynamics doesn't come from emotional numbness. It comes from clarity. You still feel, you still care, but you no longer react automatically to provocation. Your nervous system is less available for drama. When you walk into a room now, notice how you carry yourself. Is your body braced for impact or is it neutral? Do you scan for threats or do you simply observe? That internal posture influences what others perceive, even if neither of you can explain it. There's also another layer. When your frequency changes, you may feel moments of social disconnection. Invitations decrease, certain conversations feel shallow. The familiar rhythm of interaction shifts. This can create a subtle ache, a sense of being slightly out of phase with the environment you once navigated easily. It's important not to panic here. Your system is recalibrating. Old channels are fading before new ones stabilize. If you rush to re-enter previous dynamics just to feel visible again, you reinforce the old signal. Instead, stay with the unfamiliar quiet. You are not disappearing as a person. You are becoming less accessible to patterns that depended on your unconscious participation. And as that happens, your social radar also sharpens. You begin to sense who resonates with your steadier state and who does not. Sometimes this feels like standing in the middle of a crowded place and realizing the noise doesn't land the same way anymore. You see it, you hear it, but it doesn't penetrate. It's as if there is a layer of space between you and the collective agitation. And within that space, another sensation begins to emerge. Not heat, not friction, but a kind of inner quiet that can feel almost like emptiness if you're not used to it. A hollow in the chest, a pause where constant stimulation used to live. It can be mistaken for loneliness or even for something missing. Yet it may not be absence at all. It may be the clearing of internal bandwidth, making room for a different architecture of perception to settle into place. When the noise fades and the old signals stop locking onto you, what often comes next is not immediate clarity. It's a pause, a strange open space inside your chest that doesn't feel dramatic enough to be called pain, but doesn't feel full enough to be called peace either. Many people misread this moment. You might wake up and notice a subtle hollowness. Conversations feel quieter. Your usual motivations don't push as hard. The emotional spikes that once shaped your day are softer now, and in their place, there is something that resembles emptiness. The instinct is to label it quickly. Loneliness, a loss of purpose, fatigue. Something must be wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if this is a transitional vacuum? In physics, a vacuum is not pure nothingness. It is a field where old particles have dispersed and new configurations are possible. It looks empty, but it holds potential. The problem is that the human nervous system does not like open space. It prefers defined edges, familiar stimuli, predictable emotional rhythms. When those rhythms dissolve, the body can interpret the absence as danger. Notice how your body reacts to stillness. If you sit quietly for a minute without reaching for your phone, without planning, without replaying conversations, what happens? Do you feel calm immediately? Or does a subtle restlessness appear? Maybe a faint pressure in the chest. Maybe an urge to move, to fill the gap with sound or thought. Stay with that sensation for a few breaths. Not analyzing it, just noticing it. This hollow feeling is not necessarily loneliness. It may be your system clearing space. When you stop feeding old reactions and social patterns, the internal circuitry that supported them begins to power down. But the new circuitry has not fully stabilized yet. You are between structures. It's similar to renovating a house. The old furniture has been removed. The walls are bare, the room echoes. If you walk in at that moment, it feels incomplete. But that incompleteness is intentional. It allows for redesign. The danger is rushing to refill the room with the same furniture, just because the emptiness feels uncomfortable. You might feel tempted to reconnect with old distractions, to restart a conflict just to feel intensity again, to overwork, overshare, overconsume information, anything to avoid that neutral space inside. Before you do, ask yourself something simple. Is this discomfort harmful, or is it unfamiliar? There is a difference. Harm signals contraction, panic, survival threat. Unfamiliarity signals expansion without clear reference points. The vacuum often belongs to the second category, even though it can masquerade as the first. Another subtle trap appears here. The mind can dramatize the emptiness. It can create stories like, "I'm disconnected from everyone," or "I've lost my drive," or "I'm fading." But those are interpretations layered onto a raw sensation. Separate the sensation from the story. What do you actually feel in your body? A lighter chest, slower thoughts, less urgency, perhaps mild fatigue. These are physiological signs of reduced stress activation. When your nervous system shifts from constant reaction to neutrality, energy redistributes. That redistribution can feel like tiredness because your body is recalibrating. Be careful not to romanticize this stage either. It's not a mystical void where you float above reality. It's practical. It's biological. Your system is clearing old patterns of stimulation and waiting for a new baseline to establish itself. There may be moments where you question whether you're withdrawing too much. That's a healthy question. Check your behavior honestly. Are you isolating out of fear? Or are you simply less interested in unnecessary noise? The answer will show up in your body. Fear contracts. Clarity feels steady, even if quiet. This intermediate vacuum is fragile. If you flood it with old inputs too quickly, the old architecture reassembles itself. If you allow it to breathe, something different begins to form. A quieter sense of self that doesn't depend on constant feedback. And here's the subtle shift. As you sit in this emptiness without rushing to fill it, your sensitivity changes. The collective noise that once penetrated deeply starts to feel distant. Headlines, panic cycles, social outrage, they may still be visible, but they don't resonate the same way. It's almost as if the volume has been turned down, not on the world, but on your internal amplifier. From here, another layer becomes visible. You begin to notice how much of your previous anxiety was synchronized with collective fear, how often your emotional state mirrored what was broadcast around you. As the vacuum stabilizes, you start to lose resonance with that shared frequency of alarm. And that loss of resonance will test you in ways that are quieter, but just as significant. There was a time when the atmosphere of the world entered you without permission. A headline could shape your mood for hours. A conversation filled with anxiety could stay in your body long after it ended. You might not have noticed it consciously, but your nervous system was constantly syncing with the emotional climate around you. Human beings are deeply social creatures. We don't just share information, we share states. When fear spreads through a group, it behaves almost like a living field. It amplifies itself through repetition, images, tone of voice, urgency. The more attention it receives, the more solid it feels. You've lived inside those fields before. Everyone has. But something has been shifting. As the internal vacuum stabilized and your reactivity decreased, you may have noticed that the collective panic doesn't penetrate the same way anymore. The news still reports crisis. Social media still cycles outrage. Conversations still spiral into worst-case scenarios. Yet inside you there is more distance. It can feel almost strange, even isolating. You sit with others while they discuss the latest disaster, and you observe a subtle difference. Their voices tighten, their bodies lean forward. There's a charge in the air, but your breathing stays slower. Your chest doesn't contract the way it used to. You understand the content, yet you don't feel pulled under by it. This is not indifference. It's disconnection from a fear-based field. An egregore, in simple terms, is a shared emotional pattern sustained by collective attention. It doesn't require mysticism to understand. When enough people focus on the same fear repeatedly, it becomes self-reinforcing. Media amplifies it. Conversations feed it. Algorithms prioritize it. The field grows. Before, your system resonated with that frequency automatically. Now, your internal dial has shifted. Be careful here. The ego can interpret this shift as superiority. I'm more awake. I'm beyond the fear. That thought itself can become another subtle attachment. Instead, observe with humility. You are not above the field. You are simply less entangled in it. There is a practical way to test this in your own experience. The next time you encounter alarming information, pause before reacting. Notice your body first. Does your heart rate spike? Do your shoulders tense? Or is there space between the information and your response? If there is space, stay there for a few seconds. Let the information exist without immediately forming a narrative around it. You may find that much of the fear dissolves when it is not instantly reinforced by mental rehearsal. This is where many people feel conflicted. If I'm not emotionally charged about what's happening, does that mean I don't care? Shouldn't I be outraged? Shouldn't I be afraid? These are honest questions. Caring does not require panic. Action does not require anxiety. In fact, chronic fear often reduces clarity. When you are constantly triggered, your perception narrows. You react instead of evaluate. Disconnection from collective fear can actually increase your capacity to respond wisely because you are no longer drowning in the emotional wave. But there is another layer to watch carefully. Sometimes what feels like calm detachment can hide avoidance. Ask yourself gently, am I grounded or am I numbing out? The difference is subtle but important. Grounded calm feels steady and present. Numbing feels flat and disconnected from your own body. If you are grounded, you can still feel compassion. You can still acknowledge difficulty, you simply don't amplify it internally. As you continue to hold this steadier frequency, something else happens. The conversations around you may shift. Some people will stop bringing fear-based topics to you as often. Others may feel unsettled by your composure, as if your lack of emotional escalation challenges their own. You might notice that when you refuse to engage in prolonged outrage, the dynamic loses energy. Without your participation, the collective loop weakens slightly. This can feel empowering, but it can also create tension. People bond over shared anxiety. When you step out of that bond, you may feel momentarily outside the group. That sense of standing slightly apart is another threshold. The old world often runs on constant commentary and emotional reinforcement. To remain invisible to its fear structures, you must refine something deeper than silence. You must understand when to engage and when not to. Because the moment you argue intensely with the collective narrative, you re-enter the field fully. This leads to a subtle law that becomes increasingly important, knowing when not to interfere at all. There is a difference between silence that comes from fear and silence that comes from strength. At first, they can look the same from the outside. You don't argue. You don't correct. You don't jump into every debate. But inside, the quality is completely different. Active non-interference is not passive. It is not apathy. It is a deliberate choice not to inject your energy into every system that demands a response. When you begin disconnecting from collective fear and emotional heat, you may feel a new temptation to prove that you are calm, to demonstrate that you are above the chaos, to correct others who are still entangled. Ironically, that urge pulls you right back into the same field you just stepped out of. Notice how quickly the mind wants to explain itself. Someone expresses an opinion you strongly disagree with. You feel the familiar spark in your chest. Words line up in your head ready to fire. Even if your tone is measured, the internal charge is there. Active non-interference begins in that exact moment. Before speaking, pause and feel your body. Is your jaw tightening? Is your breath shortening? Is your posture subtly leaning forward as if preparing for impact? These signals tell you that your system is gearing up for engagement. Now ask yourself a simple question. What am I trying to protect right now? Often it is not truth itself, it is identity, the image of being informed, rational, spiritually aware, morally correct. When that image feels threatened, the impulse to interfere grows strong. There is nothing wrong with sharing your perspective when it is needed, but there is a profound shift that happens when you no longer feel compelled to defend your stance in every environment. You begin to conserve energy. You become selective. This selectivity changes your visibility. Old reality thrives on friction. It feeds on opposition. When you argue intensely with a system, even if you are opposing it, you are still entangled in it. Your attention reinforces its structure. Your emotional charge strengthens its presence in your inner world. Active non-interference is the art of withdrawing that charge without withdrawing your awareness. You still see what is happening. You still understand the dynamics. But you do not feel obligated to correct every distortion you encounter. You do not feel responsible for managing other people's reactions. You let certain conversations pass without entering them. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you built part of your identity around being the one who speaks up, who explains, who fixes. There may be guilt, a voice inside saying, if you don't step in, you're allowing it. But consider this carefully. Are you truly helping by reacting to everything? Or are you maintaining a cycle where every disturbance requires your personal intervention? Try something small. In your next interaction where you feel the urge to prove your point, experiment with restraint, not suppression. Simply choose not to add more energy. Listen, observe, let the conversation unfold without steering it. Notice what happens inside you. There may be restlessness, a sensation of incompleteness. Your system expects the usual discharge of energy through words. When you don't provide it, that energy has nowhere to go. Stay with it. You may realize that much of your interference was habitual, automatic, a reflex developed over years of believing that engagement equals significance. Active non-interference does not mean you never act. It means your action comes from clarity, not from heat. When you do choose to speak or intervene, it is precise, minimal, grounded. There is no internal tremor behind it, and something else begins to occur. As you stop defending yourself constantly, the need to be right softens. When the need to be right softens, the structure of opposition weakens. You become less dense within the old reality's grid of conflict. It's subtle, but powerful. The more you withdraw unnecessary interference, the more your internal observation sharpens. You begin to see patterns without being absorbed by them. You notice how quickly narratives form, how fast people attach to positions, how easily emotion crystallizes into certainty. And then a deeper question arises. If attention and reaction strengthen certain realities, what happens when you deliberately stop observing them in the same way? What shifts when your focus moves away from the disaster narrative and towards something quieter? There is a principle in physics that hints at this dynamic. The act of observation influences what manifests, and when the observer changes the quality of attention itself, the entire structure of what is perceived begins to reorganize. There is a principle in physics that says a system exists in multiple possibilities until it is observed. When observation happens, one possibility becomes real while the others fade. Whether or not you follow quantum theory closely, the metaphor is powerful. Attention selects, focus stabilizes. What you repeatedly observe gains structure. Now bring that closer to your own life. For years, you may have observed certain outcomes as inevitable: conflict, rejection, financial strain, health anxiety. You replayed them in your mind, scanned your environment for signs of them, braced your body as if they were already unfolding. In doing so, you were not creating them magically, but you were collapsing your personal possibilities around those patterns. Your nervous system prepared for them, your decisions aligned with them, your perception filtered for evidence that confirmed them. This is your personal wave function. It's the field of potential experiences available to you at any moment. Most of it remains unexpressed. But the moment you fixate intensely on one storyline, you narrow the field. You reinforce that path. Over time, it feels like destiny. When you began practicing non-interference and withdrawing reactive attention, something subtle happened. You stopped observing certain negative trajectories with the same emotional intensity. You didn't deny their existence. You simply stopped feeding them. And when you stop feeding a storyline with focused emotional observation, it loses density in your internal world. Think about a recent situation that would have once spiraled. Maybe someone ignored your message. Maybe a project slowed down. In the past, your mind might have raced toward worst-case interpretations. You would have replayed it, analyzed it, anticipated conflict. That repeated observation would have collapsed your internal possibilities toward stress. Now imagine responding differently. The same event occurs, but you pause. You notice the urge to predict disaster, but you don't follow it. You allow multiple explanations to remain open. You return your attention to something constructive. In that moment, you have refused to collapse your wave function around fear. This is not about pretending everything is positive. It is about recognizing how powerful focused attention can be in shaping your internal reality. The more you rehearse a negative future, the more your body lives as if it is already happening. Stress hormones rise, posture changes, tone shifts, behavior follows. You may say, but problems are real. Ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. That's true. Denial is not what we are talking about. We are talking about the difference between practical response and obsessive observation. If your car makes a strange noise, you get it checked. That is practical. But if you spend hours imagining catastrophic failure every time you drive, that is unnecessary collapse of possibility. Here is something you can test in your own experience. Think of a current challenge. Notice how your mind frames it automatically. Is there a fixed narrative attached to it? This always happens to me. This won't work. I know how this ends. Pause that script. Ask yourself, what are 3 other possible outcomes I have not considered? Not fantasy outcomes, realistic alternatives. Let your mind stretch. Even if you don't fully believe them yet, simply allow them to exist. Feel what happens in your body when multiple possibilities are present, instead of one rigid expectation. There is often more space, less contraction, a slight decrease in internal pressure. This is the reopening of your personal wave function. The old reality thrives on certainty, especially negative certainty. It wants you to predict collapse, to expect betrayal, to assume scarcity. Because when you observe life through that narrow lens, you act in ways that reinforce it. When you withdraw obsessive attention from disaster narratives, some of them genuinely lose momentum in your lived experience. Not because you escaped reality, but because you stopped narrowing your field around a single feared outcome. There is humility required here. You are not controlling the universe with your thoughts, but you are influencing your internal state, your decisions, your tone, your posture, your timing. Those factors shape how others respond to you. They shape which opportunities you notice. They shape which risks you take or avoid. As you become more conscious of where your attention rests, you begin to see how often you used to collapse possibilities unconsciously. And then a deeper challenge appears. Some people who discover this principle rush to observe only what feels positive. They decorate their mental space with affirmations while ignoring unresolved patterns underneath. They call it ascension. They call it light. But if observation is powerful, then false observation can be just as limiting. If you pretend the prison walls aren't there while secretly fearing them, you haven't dissolved the structure. You've only repainted it. And that realization opens the door to a more uncomfortable truth about what real freedom actually requires. There is a subtle trap that appears once you realize how powerful your attention is. You begin to understand that what you focus on gains structure in your life. You see how fear-based observation narrows your possibilities, and naturally, you want to move toward what feels lighter, calmer, more expansive. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Forcing yourself to observe only what feels positive can become another prison. It often starts with good intentions. You decide you will no longer dwell on problems. You repeat affirmations. You surround yourself with spiritual language. You speak about alignment, abundance, higher states. On the surface, it looks elevated. It looks enlightened. Yet underneath, there may still be fear. Fear of discomfort, fear of conflict, fear of being ordinary. Instead of dissolving the old walls, you repaint them with brighter colors. This is the prison of false light. It is not about crystals or quotes or meditation practices. Those can be useful. The prison forms when light becomes a strategy to avoid looking at what still hooks you, when positivity becomes armor instead of clarity. You can test this gently within yourself. Think of an area of your life that still triggers tension, maybe money, maybe aging, maybe a strained relationship. Now notice what your mind does. Does it immediately jump to a polished statement? Everything is perfect. It's all working out. I'm beyond that. Pause before accepting that response. Feel your body. Is there still contraction beneath the statement? A subtle tightening that contradicts the words? If so, the light you are projecting is covering something unresolved. Real invisibility to the old reality does not come from pretending you are unaffected. It comes from having no hooks left for it to grab. And hooks are not removed by denial. They are removed by honest observation. False light tries to float above pain. True clarity walks through it without dramatizing it. There is also an identity component here. When you start stepping out of collective fear and reactivity, it can feel empowering. You feel different from the noise, more centered, more aware. The ego quickly adapts to this and creates a new identity, the awakened one, the one who sees through illusion. But the moment you need that identity, you are attached again. If someone challenges your perspective and you feel threatened, that's a hook. If you secretly need others to recognize your growth, that's a hook. If you look down on people who are still entangled in drama, that's a hook. False light is subtle because it feels elevated, it feels clean, it feels correct, but it often lacks humility. Ask yourself quietly, where do I still need to be seen as evolved? Where do I still defend my awareness? Where do I avoid difficult conversations by labeling them as low vibration instead of addressing them calmly? These questions are not meant to judge you. They are meant to free you. When you stop trying to appear spiritually advanced, something relaxes. You don't need to curate your state constantly. You don't need to force positivity. You can admit this still affects me without collapsing into it. That honesty is powerful because when you face a hook directly, without decorating it, it weakens. You see it clearly. You feel the sensation in your body. You notice the story attached to it. And instead of bypassing it with light, you stay present until the charge decreases. This process is quieter than spiritual performance. No one applauds you for it. It doesn't look impressive. But it dismantles the prison from the inside. There is also another layer to consider. When you avoid darkness entirely, you fragment yourself. You split into the elevated self and the shadow self. The shadow does not disappear. It waits. It influences behavior from behind the scenes. Integration is not glamorous. It is steady. It is the willingness to acknowledge irritation, jealousy, doubt, fatigue without turning them into identity and without denying them in the name of light. As you release the need to appear illuminated, your frequency becomes more authentic. There is less performance, less tension, less subtle defense. And from that grounded place, your body may begin to feel different. You might notice waves of tiredness or vivid intuition or sudden insights that don't come from mental effort. It can feel like your system is recalibrating at a deeper level, translating signals your conscious mind has not yet organized into language. As you stop performing light and begin living with more honesty, something shifts in your body before it fully registers in your thoughts. You may feel unusually tired some days, even without obvious reason. Or you may wake up with insights that seem to arrive from nowhere, clear and complete, without the usual mental struggle. It can feel like your system is updating itself quietly. Now, let's ground this. Your DNA is not magically rewriting itself overnight, but your nervous system, your hormonal patterns, your neural pathways, these are constantly adapting. Every time you respond differently to stress, every time you choose observation over reaction, you are reinforcing new circuits. Over time, those circuits become your new baseline. That can feel physical. When you stop feeding old fear patterns, your body has to recalibrate. Cortisol levels shift, muscle tension patterns change, even your breathing rhythm adjusts. If your system has been running on high alert for years, learning to live without that background tension can feel like exhaustion at first. It's similar to what happens when someone leaves a loud factory after decades inside. The silence feels overwhelming. You might interpret that fatigue as weakness or worry that something is wrong, but sometimes it is simply your biology catching up with your awareness. There is also another dimension to this shift. Intuition becomes clearer. When your mind is constantly reacting, it is noisy. Thoughts overlap, emotions spike, decisions are made quickly, often defensively. But as you practice non-interference and reduce reactive collapse of possibilities, the mental static decreases. In that quieter state, subtle signals become easier to detect. You might sense when a conversation will not lead anywhere productive before it escalates. You might feel drawn to call someone at the exact moment they need support. You may recognize an opportunity not because it looks impressive, but because it feels steady in your body. This kind of intuition is not mystical in the dramatic sense. It is pattern recognition operating without distortion. Your brain is constantly scanning for cues based on past experience. When fear and ego are loud, those cues get filtered through anxiety or pride. When you are calmer, the signal is cleaner. Some traditions would describe this as activating dormant codes or accessing ancient knowing. You don't need to frame it that way to benefit from it. What matters is that your perception sharpens when internal conflict decreases. Pay attention to how information arrives now. Does it always come through deliberate analysis? Or do you sometimes just know something without a chain of reasoning? That knowing often shows up as a physical sensation first. A relaxed expansion in the chest when something aligns. A subtle contraction in the gut when something is off. The key is learning to distinguish intuition from fear. Fear is loud, urgent, and dramatic. It demands immediate action. Intuition is quieter. It does not panic. It presents a direction and allows you to choose. To test this in your daily life, the next time you face a decision, pause before analyzing it fully. Ask yourself, what is my body's first response? Not the story, not the logic. The body, notice the sensation. Then give it a few hours before acting if possible. See if that initial signal remains consistent. Intuition tends to stay steady. Fear fluctuates and amplifies. As your internal noise decreases, you may also feel moments of emotional release. Old memories surface briefly and then fade. Random feelings appear without clear triggers. This is not regression. It can be part of integration. Your system is reorganizing stored responses. Be careful not to dramatize this phase. You are not becoming superhuman. You are becoming more coherent. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align more consistently, your body operates with less internal contradiction. That coherence feels like strength, even if it begins with fatigue. There may be days when you question all of this, when you feel ordinary again, when intuition seems silent. That's normal. Integration is not linear. It moves in cycles. What matters is that you are no longer outsourcing your guidance entirely to external noise. You are building trust with your own internal signals. And as that trust deepens, a new responsibility emerges. It's one thing to sense more clearly. It's another to anchor that clarity in a world that still runs on distraction and reaction. Because being off the old radar is not the end of the process. It requires a deliberate way of standing in your daily life without being pulled back into old densities. Clarity by itself is not enough. You can feel calmer, more intuitive, less reactive, and still drift if you don't anchor that state into your daily life. Insight without embodiment fades. Awareness without practice becomes memory. Anchoring is simple, but it is not automatic. If you are no longer fully entangled in the old emotional fields, you now hold more influence over your internal state. That influence can either stabilize into something real or slowly dissolve if you return to unconscious habits. The difference is in small, repeated actions. Start with something basic, your mornings. Before you reach for your phone, before you allow external information to shape your state, take 1 minute to notice your breathing, not to control it, just to observe it. Feel the air move in and out. Notice the temperature. Notice the weight of your body against the bed or the chair. This is not a ritual for show. It is a reset of authorship. You are choosing to begin from your own nervous system instead of from headlines or notifications. Throughout the day, practice selective engagement, not withdrawal. Selective engagement. When someone brings you agitation, feel your feet on the ground while they speak. Let your body remain relaxed even if their tone is sharp. You don't have to mirror their intensity. You don't have to absorb it. You can respond in a measured way or not at all, depending on what is truly required. Silence becomes strategic here. Not cold silence, not passive-aggressive silence, but grounded silence, the kind that does not rush to fill space with explanation. The old world runs on constant commentary. The new stability you are building runs on precision. You speak when there is something real to say. You act when action is clean. You step back when stepping back preserves coherence. Another anchor is physical movement. When you shift states internally, your body needs integration. A simple walk without headphones can recalibrate you more than hours of mental processing. Feel your steps. Notice your surroundings without labeling everything. Let your senses reorient you to the present moment. This grounds your awareness into muscle and bone instead of leaving it abstract. You may also notice that certain environments now feel heavy, crowded digital spaces, endless arguments, sensational content. Anchoring means being honest about what destabilizes you and adjusting accordingly. Not from fear, from discernment. Discernment is different from avoidance. Avoidance runs from discomfort. Discernment chooses what strengthens coherence. As you practice this, your presence changes. People may comment that you seem steadier, or they may simply feel it without naming it. You are no longer broadcasting reactivity. You are not feeding fear. You are not performing light. You are simply consistent. Consistency is power. There is also a deeper layer to anchoring. It is the willingness to remain ordinary while holding this awareness. You still pay bills. You still have conversations. You still face uncertainty. Anchoring does not remove you from life. It places you inside it with more stability. Test yourself gently. When something unexpected happens, a delay, a disagreement, a financial surprise, observe your first reaction. Does your body spike into old tension patterns? Or is there space before response? If there is space, breathe into it. Let that space be your anchor. Respond from there. Over time, this becomes less of a practice and more of a baseline. You won't need to remind yourself constantly. The steadiness will feel natural. But remember, invisibility to the old reality does not mean disconnection from humanity. You are still part of the collective field. The difference is that you are no longer unconsciously reinforcing its densest patterns. Your attention is more deliberate. Your reactions are fewer. Your intuition is clearer. And your silence carries weight because it is not avoidance. It is choice. Anchoring in this way is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens in grocery stores, in meetings, in family conversations. It happens when you choose not to escalate, when you choose not to internalize, when you choose to stay present inside your own body. This is how you remain off the old radar while fully participating in life. Not by disappearing physically, not by isolating, but by maintaining coherence regardless of external noise. And from that coherence, something powerful becomes evident. When the old world cannot hook your attention, it cannot define your experience. You are not losing your mind. You are losing attachment to patterns that once defined you. The noise feels distant because you stopped feeding it. The conflicts feel lighter because you no longer collapse yourself into them. This is not escape. It is coherence. It is choosing where your attention lives and refusing to let the old reality hook you through fear, reaction, or performance. If this resonated with you and you made it all the way here, write in the comments, "I choose coherence over chaos." That's how I'll know you stayed until the end. And if you want to go deeper into this path, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen now. If this spoke to you, there is more waiting for you there.